Hey everyone, and welcome. You know how we love to really get into a topic? Well, get ready, because today we're diving deep into witchcraft.
Ooh, sounds intriguing.
It is. Specifically, we're looking at Raymond Buckland's complete book of witchcraft. You know, that classic.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of it, of course. A foundational text for many.
Exactly. We've got a YouTube video review as a starting point.
Interesting. I always like hearing different perspectives.
Me too. And we'll be pulling some text excerpts too to get into the details.
Sounds like we have our work cut out for us.
We do, but that's the fun part, right?
Yeah.
What I find particularly fascinating is this book was published back in the 1970s.
Yeah, that was a different era, to say the least.
It was, and thinking about how both witchcraft and Wicca have evolved since then, well, that's what we're going to unpack today.
Oh, I see. So it's like we're using this book as a lens to view these changes.
Right. It's like a time capsule of beliefs and practices.
I like that. A time capsule.
Now, one thing that really jumped out at me from the video review was that Buckland's book seems to be more about traditional Wicca.
Ah, okay, that makes sense, given the time period.
Yeah. The reviewer actually made a point of saying that back in the 70s, the terms Wicca and witchcraft were often used kind of interchangeably.
Huh. Interesting. So you're saying that distinction wasn't as clear back then as it might be today.
Exactly. Today, there's more awareness of the nuances and the diversity of paths. But back then, it was all kind of lumped together.
So Buckland's work is giving us a glimpse into that earlier understanding.
Precisely. And the reviewer even said that Buckland's book is more in line with what they called old school, like traditional Wicca, which might surprise some folks familiar with modern practices.
I bet. So what exactly makes Buckland's view traditional? What would be different from, say, how Wicca is often practiced or understood today?
Well, for starters, Buckland goes deep into the history of witchcraft in the book, going all the way back to prehistoric times.
Wow, starting at the very beginning. I like it.
He talks about nature worship as like the root of it all,
Yeah.
and then traces how those early practices evolved.
Fascinating. And then, of course, the inevitable clash with Christianity.
Oh, absolutely. He talks
Yeah.
about that too, the impact of Christianity on pagan practices.
The demonization, the persecution, a dark period for sure.
Right, the witch hunts and all of that is heavy stuff.
But important to acknowledge, right? To understand the context of where modern witchcraft comes from.
Totally. Buckland lays it all out there, kind of like he's setting the stage for how witchcraft re-emerged in modern times.
So going back to that idea of traditional Wicca.
Yeah, so Buckland presents Wicca as very much centered on the duality of the divine.
The god and goddess.
Exactly. That balance of masculine and feminine energy is key.
And that plays into the whole Wheel of the Year concept, right?
Yep. He places a lot of emphasis on the Wheel of the Year, that cycle of 8 Sabbats that mark the changing seasons.
Samhain, Yule, all those.
Connecting with the rhythms of nature, it's all tied together.
It's a framework that many modern pagans and Wiccans still follow today.
It is, but what's interesting is how some of the specific rituals and practices that Buckland describes in the book might feel a little, well, out of step with contemporary practices.
You mean maybe a little cringy when viewed through a modern lens?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, remember, this book was written in the 70s. Some things haven't aged that well.
I can imagine. Like what, for example, what did you find particularly striking?
Where he talked about all these traditional tools, anthems, chalices, pentacles.
Yeah, the classic.
And he describes rituals like circle casting and, oh boy, the initiation ritual he describes.
What's to tell?
It involves nudity, blindfolds, and being bound. The reviewer was like, no thanks.
Yeah, I can see how that wouldn't exactly fly today.
Totally different cultural norms now. Plus, there's a big emphasis on opposite gender interactions in a lot of the rituals, which also might raise some eyebrows today.
Like what? Any specific examples?
Oh, there's this anointing ritual, and get this, even a version of Duck, Duck, Goose that involves kissing.
Whoa. Okay, that's different.
You can just picture the reviewer's face when they read that part.
I bet. It sounds like these elements highlight the differences between traditional Wicca and more contemporary witchcraft practices.
They really do. And it makes you wonder, if Buckland were alive today, how would he view these shifts?
It's an interesting question. Would he embrace the changes?
Or stick to his guns? Who knows? But it's definitely food for thought.
It is. And speaking of food for thought, let's move on to another key aspect. How Buckland portrays the role of a witch.
Oh yeah, that's an important one. It's where we start to see a departure from those old negative stereotypes.
So how does he frame it?
He paints a picture of witches as healers, wise individuals working for the good of humanity and the earth.
Interesting. So he's challenging those traditional negative portrayals.
Absolutely. Almost like he's trying to reclaim the image of the witch and align it with positive values, a deep respect for nature.
Like giving witchcraft a much-needed image makeover.
Exactly. And central to that is his emphasis on ethics.
Ethics, huh? Tell me more about that.
Well, he talks specifically about the Wiccan Rede. And it harm none, do what you will. Taking personal responsibility, making sure your magic doesn't cause harm.
It's a powerful, simple principle. Use your power for good.
Right. And it's a message that resonates with many witches today, whether they're traditional Wiccans or follow a different path. It's all about being mindful of the impact of your actions.
Makes sense. Now, we've talked about individual practice, but Buckland also addresses the community aspect, right?
It does. He talks about covens, those organized groups of witches, the role of coven leaders, how they function. But, and I found this really interesting, he acknowledges that not all witches are part of covens.
Oh, okay. So he recognizes that there's a place for both group and solo practice.
Exactly. He's clear that both are valid ways to explore and practice witchcraft.
That's a good point. Even within traditional Wicca, there's room for individual expression.
Right. It's not one size fits all. Now, there's one area where Buckland's views might spark a bit of debate, maybe even controversy.
Oh.
His perspective on death and grief.
Okay, that's a sensitive topic for sure.
It is. And the YouTube reviewer called out a specific passage where Buckland states that feeling sorrow over death is basically selfishness.
Whoa. Okay. That's a pretty strong statement.
Right. And the reviewer pointed out how that might feel insensitive to someone who's experienced a profound loss, like the death of a parent.
Yeah, I can see how that could be hurtful or dismissive of someone's grief.
Definitely. And it's worth noting that death rituals are approached in many different ways across various witchcraft traditions.
So Buckland's view might be specific to his understanding, not necessarily a universal one.
Right. It's a point of potential conflict, for sure. And it also highlights how societal views on death and grieving have probably shifted significantly since the 70s.
It's true. What might have been acceptable back then might not be now. Our understanding of grief and loss has evolved.
So ultimately, where does all of this leave us with Buckland's book as a whole? Well, the video essayist we've been talking about sees it more as a historical artifact.
I see. Informative, but maybe not a practical guide for today's witches.
Yeah. It was groundbreaking in its time, no doubt, but it also very much reflects the specific historical and cultural moment when it was written.
A snapshot of the past, you could say?
Exactly. Like those old photos we find fascinating, but don't necessarily want to recreate today.
Huh, right. But they do help us understand how far things have come.
Absolutely. Buckland's book gives us a glimpse into the roots of modern witchcraft and reminds us that traditions evolve.
They adapt, shed certain practices, embrace new ideas. It's a journey.
So there you have it. We've covered a lot of ground here in part 1 of our deep dive. We explored the historical context, dove into traditional Wicca as presented by Buckland, and even uncovered some of those eyebrow-raising rituals.
And we've only just begun. There's still so much more to explore. All right, so we've spent some time with Buckland's view of witchcraft in the 70s, but how does it all apply to us now?
Right, good question. I mean, yeah, it's cool to see where these ideas came from, but does this old book have anything to offer modern practitioners?
Well, I think one thing that still resonates is Buckland's focus on personal responsibility and empowerment. Like, witchcraft isn't just about spells, it's about cultivating a deep connection with yourself and the natural world.
It's about owning your own power,
Yeah.
right? Not relying on some external authority or dogma.
Exactly. It's about tapping into that inner strength and wisdom, shaping your own reality. And that idea is still powerful today, even if some of the specific rituals Buckland describes feel a bit outdated.
Totally. And speaking of magic and spell work, Buckland has a pretty grounded approach.
Yeah, it's not all bubbling cauldrons and fancy incantations.
Right. It's more about focusing your intentions and working with natural energies to bring about your desires.
So less hocus pocus, more about harnessing your own mind and will.
Exactly. He talks a lot about visualization, meditation, aligning your actions with your goals. It's a very practical approach.
Very down to earth, even if he uses some language that might sound a bit mystical today.
Totally.
Yeah.
And he actually encourages readers to experiment. Like, try different techniques and figure out what works best for you.
Oh, I like that. It's about personal exploration and discovery.
Which, honestly, is a very modern approach, don't you think? It's about finding your own unique path.
Oh, for sure. It's not about blindly following a set of rules. So even though the book is very much about traditional Wicca, Buckland doesn't shy away from the fact that there are different branches of witchcraft.
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum. He even talks about ceremonial magic and folk magic.
Oh, wow. He really covers a lot of ground.
He does. Even touches on practices that might be considered taboo or controversial.
So, like he's saying, hey, there's no one right way to be a witch.
Exactly. He encourages readers to be open-minded and explore different perspectives.
And that open-mindedness is so important. We have to remember there's no single witchcraft experience.
Right. It's about embracing that diversity.
Now, I want to leave you with something to think about. Buckland wrote this book nearly 50 years ago. What do you think his perspective would be if he were writing it today?
Oh, that's an interesting question. What would he keep? What would he change?
Right. Would he adapt his views? Imagine Buckland in conversation with a modern witch.
Oh, that would be fascinating. Where would they agree? Where would they clash?
It really highlights how much things have evolved, but it also shows how important it is to stay curious.
To be open to new ideas and keep exploring this complex world of witchcraft.
Exactly.
It's wild to think how much witchcraft has changed in just a few decades.
Right. Like Buckland's book is a real time capsule.
But it's also cool to see how some core ideas are still around today.
That's true. There are some things that just never go out of style.
I think it's that sense of empowerment you get from witchcraft.
Yeah, like connecting to something ancient and powerful.
Yeah, exactly. And Buckland was writing back in the 70s, but that desire to understand nature, to tap into your own power, that's got to be timeless.
For sure. And we can't forget about that strong focus on ethics.
Right. Taking responsibility for your actions.
That's something that's even more important now.
Like, we're all more aware of how our actions impact the world around us.
Definitely. You can't just mess around with magic without thinking about the consequences.
Absolutely. And Buckland really stresses the importance of questioning everything.
Yeah, like don't just blindly believe everything you read.
Use your brain. Trust your gut. Figure out what feels right for you.
Such good advice. And not just for witchcraft, for everything.
Exactly. Take control of your own beliefs and your own path.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the main takeaway is that Buckland's book, even though it's from another era,
Yeah, it's old school. We get it.
it really got people talking and thinking about witchcraft.
It's a reminder that traditions change and grow over time.
And as you explore witchcraft, whether you're new to it or you've been practicing for years,
It's your journey. Find what works for you.
exactly, don't be afraid to question, to experiment, to find your own way.
Keep learning. Keep that curiosity alive.
And until next time, may your magic be bright.
See ya.